People that are very familiar with the Danganronpa series are probably aware of its beta version, Distrust. In case you don't know what the key differences are between the beta and the full release, there are two main points that make it a significant distinction. The first and most talked about aspect is the scrapped mechanic of the trust meter. The trust meter served as a way of telling which students trusted you and which ones didn't, which changed based on how much you interacted with them. Depending on how much each student trusted you, the outcome of the game would be different. It would drastically alter the course of each chapter by changing who the killers and victims were, which added an extra layer of personal experience and replayability to the games. This is in direct contrast to the release of Danganronpa, where all of the chapters are predetermined, only leaving rooms for repeat playthroughs if you either forget the story or are an extreme superfan. The second key difference is in the game's art style and atmosphere. Danganronpa was supposed to be a lot scarier and leaned drastically more into the horror elements and oppressive atmosphere of the game. A lot of the art was black and white, with most of the little bits of colors being for UI, dramatic lighting, or blood. There aren't a lot of screenshots or footage of Distrust, but there is footage of the first class trial and Leon's execution that shows this art style in action. Even some of the other aspects of the game were planned to be way more brutal and disturbing, like the designs of the individual rooms, and there's an unused execution of Junko that showed her getting decapitated with a guillotine. This more disturbing, creepier version of the game was scrapped because the developers thought it wouldn't sell well with the direction they went. While it's really hard not to agree with the fact that scrapping Distrust to turn it into an anime game was the correct play for marketability, I personally think that I would have loved the series a lot more if they went all in to it being a horror game. The reason why a lot of people enjoy Danganronpa is mainly for its characters. And while I enjoyed a lot of the cast too, here's my top 10 if anyone wants to flame me, the main reason why I actually cared enough to continue playing was because of how good the setting and atmosphere of the games were. In my opinion, it was set up to be peak psychological horror. The horror of the situation is something that I think is incredibly interesting. Being trapped inside some random area, being forced to either accept your fate as a prisoner and live there forever, or try to get away with murder to get out, everything from the scenes of the body discoveries, the investigation of the corpses, the looming threat of Monokuma, and the sense of a time limit to figure out who the killer is, while still not even really knowing where you are or why this is happening to you. Starting every morning not knowing if the person you were talking to last night was murdered by another one of your friends, seeing a student who had their whole life ahead of them being driven to kill, and the realization that their horrible deeds were in vain as they get forcefully executed as everyone else watches. The entire concept of it is extremely scary. In a version of the game where everything is more gruesome and leans more into the fear factor, even doing as much as exploring the school would give a total sense of dread. It'd feel like every conversation you have, every room you enter, every time you wake up, it could all lead to something terrifying happening. Danganronpa is already a game filled to the brim with suspense, but this added layer of spooky atmosphere and darker theming would make it feel like genuinely everything in this game carries far more weight than it already does. A true feeling of knowing that anything could take a turn for the worse at any moment. A creepier atmosphere would also really hammer in the feeling of wanting to escape from this place. Especially once the students started dropping like flies, exploring the haunted wasteland of the academy really increased the sense of dread I had about the situation they were in. I mean, if you turn off the background music, it really does feel like something's just gonna pop out at you at any moment. There are also other key moments of the game that are still genuinely pretty creepy. Some moments that really got to me were the ending of Leon's execution, the body discoveries and scenes of Sayaka, Mukuro, and Sakura's deaths,
wasn't supposed to. Why me?
And even in Danganronpa 2 and V3, there are still some really creepy moments, despite those games leaning pretty drastically into the more anime sides of things. Now, I'm not exactly saying that the game should be explicitly more gory, since that's definitely not the only and not even the best way, I think, to achieve the type of game that I'm asking for. In fact, I actually really hate gore for the most part. The biggest thing is that Distrust created a setting that would have undoubtedly have the dialogue be taken more seriously. Danganronpa 1 still does take itself pretty seriously when it needs to, but in the second game they kind of really start to lean away from that, and in V3 it just gets completely off the walls after like the first chapter. I still enjoyed those games for what they had, but they were kind of for different reasons than why I liked Danganronpa 1. As for the other half of Distrust, the trust meter mechanic, I personally like it better that this was scrapped. The Danganronpa trials really thrive in its 4th and 5th chapters of the games thanks to the longer time that the characters have to build relationships with each other. The 4th trial in V3, for example, was so intense that it genuinely brought me to tears because of how upsetting it was to see. And these chapters are very often solidifying the main characters involved as some of my favorites. What would effectively be the Danganronpa randomizer, while fun to think about, would probably make for a less memorable experience than the linear plotline they followed for the actual games. This concept is even kind of a trend on YouTube, where people spin a wheel to randomize the killers and victims themselves and try to come up with a story about it. Depending on who you get, you have to really reach to make some of them make sense. What's up, gang? We're gonna do this to pad out the video length, and also just because it seems kind of funny and I'm proving my point, really. Let's roll. This is gonna be the protagonist. Fuck yeah. Got it. Cool. Alright, who's gonna be the first killer? Chihiro. Got it. Yeah, so... Huh. Wait, how... Okay, so who's Chihiro gonna kill? Celeste? What? How? He wouldn't fucking do that. Chapter 2 murderer is Yasuhiro. Got it. Honestly, I could see it. I could see him killing someone, but who would he kill? That's the question you have to... Himself? He killed himself in chapter 2. He did do that. Yeah, I remember when he did that. Why? I guess all right, this is chapter 3 killer. I'm rolling 2. You have to roll 2 victims for this. So Leon kills 2 people. Who does Leon kill? We're leaving Leon in the wheel. Sayak? Dude! At least to me, it feels a lot more impactful for a story when there is a definitive canon. Anyways, that's all I really wanted to say, because I didn't really see anyone who shared the same opinion as mine, as most discussion around this topic seems to be solely about the distrust mechanic. I'm aware of the existence of a couple fan projects that intended to remake the feel of the original game, but from the few things that I've seen about them, it looks like they've been abandoned.